César Franck was a great composer of French romantic music. That'd be from the 1800s. And, but don't be fooled, he was actually from Ireland. No. But he was from Belgium, not France. And I wondered, how in the world can I help you people really enjoy this music? I think there are three ways to listen to it, actually. Actually, there are lots of ways to listen to music, but three main ways. And one is just to sit back and enjoy the music for what it is. Hopefully some nice melodies, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. The second way might be to get more analytical about it, and musicians love to do this. We'll talk about patterns of melody and rhythm and harmony, and talk about the overall structure. But let me tell you something about the structure. The title is Prelude, Fugue, and Variation. So you might think it's in three separate movements. First movement being the prelude, second, and then being a pause. The second movement being the fugue, yes, and then a pause, and then a variation movement. Well, it's kind of like that, but not exactly. You have the prelude, which has a nice main theme to it, and then there's a pause, but then there's an interlude before the fugue. The interlude is short, and it's a bigger sound, and after the interlude there is a pause before the second movement, which is the fugue. But don't be fooled by the interlude, because there are actually a couple rests in the interludes. And what's the difference between a rest and a pause? I'll let you figure that out. So the second movement is a fugue, so it starts with a theme, and then other themes are added to it and does some different things, and it ends up with a rather big sound by the end of it. And then there is no pause before going into the third movement, which is a variation. What is it a variation of? It's actually a variation of the prelude more than the fugue. And I'm thinking, so that's one way to listen to it. Get analytical and enjoy all those aspects of it. But a third way to listen to it would be to think of a story or a program. What does the music reflect in some non-musical way, maybe? And I was giving this some thought, and thought, well, Franck wrote actually a lot of church music. He wrote symphonic music as well. He wrote a nice setting of Psalm 150. But he wrote a lot of organ music. And it wouldn't surprise me if he had this in his mind, but I have no idea whether he did or not. But I think this prelude, fugue, and variation may reflect a Christian believer's season of prayer. So that the first movement, this prelude, that has that theme that repeats, might be like a believer who has one request to make of the Lord. And he might repeat the request because he wants to make sure the Lord hears him. And it's not a vain repetition, of course, but a repeated request. And then, you get to the point where he might have come humbly before the Lord and been acknowledging God's sovereignty in all this, but it gets to the point, but Lord, what about this? And what about that? In dealing with whatever this request is. And so the interlude might reflect that very quickly. And then the fugue might be, well, he really starts to wrestle with the Lord in prayer. Where, he has one voice saying this, Lord, but the Lord says, well, there's this aspect to it you haven't even thought of. And, it becomes really, it's almost like a wrestling match. I think of Jacob in Genesis and his wrestling with the Lord. And by the end of it, it gets pretty loud. But is anything resolved? It doesn't really sound that way. However, the way the music goes, as I said, there's no pause, but by the end of that loud ending, then you hear, if the organ is working correctly, you'll hear a very low pedal note, softly, which then leads into the variation. And so even though something has not been resolved, as far as you know, during this time of prayer, you've gained something from the experience. You've somehow got a new perspective on that request that you were making at the beginning. So that's another way to listen to it. You can listen to it one of those three ways, or a mix of those three ways, or come up with your own way. You can let me know how you enjoyed it, if you enjoyed it.